Hello everyone and welcome to another Flux video tutorial. My name is Zach Peterson and today I'm going to introduce everybody to the difference between forking and cloning in the Flux platform. Now you don't have to be an expert with a version control system like Git to understand forking and cloning. I'm going to show you how it works in the Flux platform and what the main difference between these two methods is. Make sure to hop onto the Flux platform, follow along, and let's get started. So in the introduction, I brought up Git, and there's a reason for that. So if you're familiar with Git, then you should know that Git is a version control system. And the reason I bring up a version control system is because forking and cloning are two operations that are performed in version control systems. Now, the Flux platform does have a version control system built into it that allows you to track changes and revisions to a project. So we have another video that is linked in the description that talks all about the version control system in Flux. So I'd encourage you to check that out if you're not familiar with this system in Flux. So first, what are forking and cloning? Well, I think the easiest way to understand this is to hop into the Flux platform and then start a new project. And then from there, we can learn a little bit about forking and cloning. So let's just say for a moment I'm inside of this particular project. I'm going to open up a part here and drag it into the schematic. And from this portion here, what I could do is I could start wiring this up to other components as I drag them in. But what I could also do is I could open this up and I could make my own copy of it. So just as an example, maybe I want to take this sub layout, I want to modify it somehow, I want to make it into my own thing. And I found it in the public library. Well, what I can do is I can either fork it or I can clone it. So to access those features, what you would first want to do is open up this sub layout. You could either right click here and just click open, or here inside the library you can just click on this link and this will open up the original project. Now once this loads and you're inside this project, what you can do is you can then access the forking and cloning features. So the main place you could access them is right here in the main menu, and you see there's two options. We have clone project and fork project. So I'm going to show forking first because this is where it's related to version control. So the easiest way to fork is, of course, just go here to fork project. You can also use this button right here, and if I click this, it will fork a copy of that project and it'll open it up. And you'll then see that once this project forks, it's going to be available in my workspace. So what I could do is I could just rename this right now, forked project, and this particular project will then be available in my profile. So if I just open up my profile, here you can see once it loads that there will be an entry for this particular project in my profile. You can already see that this project that I've opened up was forked from another project, and it lists that original project right here in the right side of the screen. So if I wanted to, I could then of course open this up, go back to that original project and take a look at it if I really wanted to. But once I have it in this state, I can then modify it as I see fit. So it's now available in my workspace, it is in my profile, I can start doing with it whatever I want, and I could just start adding parts to it if I wanted to and start wiring them up. This is where the version control issue comes in, because this forked project is still linked to the change history or the revision history of this original project. And you can see this if you just go up to the main menu and then you click change history. So you'll notice here in the change history that there are two entries by me at this time, okay? And then there are a bunch of entries here from this earlier user before that instance where I forked the project. So you can see all of the changes that happened before I forked the project are listed here, and then you can see the instance where I forked the project, and then you can see this instance where it says added elements, and so that's this resistor that I added right here inside the schematic. So the system keeps track of all of those earlier changes when you fork a project, and if you wanted to, you could essentially click one of these, and then I could restore this version of the project in my own profile. So now if I just exit out of here and I go back into my profile, you can now see right here, this is the project that we just forked from the original resistor ladder sublayout project. So it will be accessible inside of your profile. And once it's accessible, you can then make modifications to it. I could, of course, then go through and publish any of those changes, and then those will be accessible inside of the public library. So this should illustrate what forking is. When you fork a project, you maintain that link to all of those earlier versions of the original project through the version control system. So now let's take a look at what cloning is. So if I just go back here to the original project, and I open this project either from the library panel or just by right-clicking and selecting open. What I could also do is take this project and make a copy of it by duplicating it through cloning. Now, the cloning option is only available here in the main menu. And if I go here and just click on clone project, it's also going to make a duplicate of that project. And that project is also going to be accessible inside of my profile, just like the forked project was. The difference arises if we then jump in here and look at the change history. Here in the change history, it starts by cloning, and that's it. So there is not only a complete lack of any of that version control history from the original project, but also you'll notice here on the right side that there's no link to that original project here in the cloned project. So the cloned project has absolutely no link to the version control system, or I should say to the versions in the version control system of that earlier project. So I can't roll back this cloned project to an earlier version. It basically starts a totally new thread in the version control system. Now, once I make the clone, I can start dragging stuff in here and start modifying it. And then, of course, once this saves, I can then open up the change history. And if I look at the change history, you can see here added elements, added elements. So that's these two components that I just dragged into the schematics. So this should illustrate the difference between forking and cloning. When I'm forking something, I still have access to all of those earlier revisions that are stored in the version control system for that original project. Whereas with cloning, I don't have access to any of that, and I'm making a totally new thread in that version control system, and it's going to have its own change history that's totally independent of the original project. So the last thing I'd like to note about this is I can still access the forking and cloning features even if I only have view access. So just to show you, let's say in this project, under the share option, if I change the access level from edit to view, and I click done, I come over here and I refresh this, I'll still be able to access the cloning and forking features. I just won't be able to do any editing. So you'll notice here, if I just go up to the main menu, you can see I can access both features. So once I clone or I fork this project, it'll be a project that I now own. So I'll be the administrator of it, and then I can control who else has edit or view access to this forked or cloned project. So this gives me some control over my own branch coming off of this project, so I could make my own modifications that then become totally independent from the earlier revisions that are stored in the version control system, or I could start making my own revisions to the project, but if I need to, I could still roll back to an earlier version of the project looking through the change history window inside of the platform. So the last point I'd like to note here is with any forked project that I am the administrator of, I can then of course go through and publish these changes to the public library if I'm finished modifying my own version of this cloned or forked project. So here I've got the cloned project open. You can see here I've got a publish option, and then of course here if I go back into the forked version, I also have the published option. So I can control when I then release this new project, whether it's forked or cloned, for public access through the library panel. Once it's published, then of course it'll be searchable, and then anyone else can then access the project, they can fork it or clone it on their own, and then they can create their own version. Last thing to note is that there are parts updates that can apply to the parts that appear in this project. So those parts updates, of course, don't automatically get applied just like in any other portion of the platform. So sometimes when you open a project, you will then see a little notification down here that mentions that there are updates to parts. And when you're in a forked project, you can of course click the parts updates option. It'll tell you whether or not there's anything that that has been updated and needs to be reviewed. Here we can see that everything is up to date. But if there was a part update, it would appear in this window. So we have another video on parts updates that is going to be in the description for this video. So make sure you go and check that out to see how parts updates get applied automatically across the platform, and then you can go through and review those and accept them or reject them in all your projects. Doesn't matter if you created it, if it's been cloned, or if it's been forked, you still have control over all of that in the Flux platform. Thanks everyone for following along with this. I think the version control system in Flux is one of the things that makes the platform really unique. Combined with the forking and cloning features, it's a really great way to be able to control all of those prior changes to your project in a really simple interface. So that's one of the great things about the Flux platform, and I think it really lends itself to the community focus that the platform has. So make sure you follow along with all of our videos. We're going to have more tutorials coming up, and also make sure you check out the linked videos in the description that I mentioned earlier. Thanks everyone.